The thing that was amazing about Bill Evans' trios was the interplay among the band members that often bordered on collective improvisation and blurred the line between soloist and accompanist. If you listen to his work with bassist Scott LaFaro, they sound like one person with four hands. This is also true of his later trios, but there was something particularly special about his chemistry with LaFaro and Paul Motian. In September 1956, producer Orrin Keepnews recorded the reluctant Bill Evans, convinced by a demo tape played to him over the phone. The result was his debut album, New Jazz Conceptions, featuring the original versions of Waltz for Debbie and Five. 11 songs were recorded in the first session, including Evans' original composition, Waltz for Debbie, which would prove to be his most recognized and recorded composition. The album began Evans' relationship with Riverside Records and also marked the formation of the first Bill Evans trio with musicians Teddy Kotick and Paul Motian. Although a critical success that gained positive reviews in Downbeat and Metronome magazines, New Jazz Conceptions was initially a financial failure, selling only 800 copies the first year. In December 1958, Evans recorded the trio album Everybody Digs Bill Evans for Riverside Records with Sam Jones and drummer Philly Joe Jones. This was Evans' second album as a leader, the first since New Jazz Conceptions, recorded 2 years earlier. While producer Orrin Keepnews had many times tried to persuade Evans to make a second trio recording, the pianist felt he had nothing new to say until then. He had also been too busy traveling with Davis to make a record. Evans returned to the Davis Sextet in early 1959 at the trumpeter's request to record Kind of Blue, often considered the best-selling jazz album of all time. One of the pieces to appear on the album was Leonard Bernstein's Some Other Time. Evans started to play an introduction, however. According to Keepnews, who was present, the pianist spontaneously started to improvise over that harmonic frame, creating the recording that would be named Peace Piece. According to Evans, what happened was that I started to play the introduction, and it started to get so much of its own feeling and identity that I just figured, well, I'll keep going. Sometime during the late 1950s, most probably before joining Miles Davis, Evans began using heroin. Philly Joe Jones has been cited as an especially bad influence in this aspect. Although Davis seems to have tried to help Evans kick his addiction, he did not succeed. In 1959, Evans was performing at Basin Street East and was visited by bassist Scott LaFaro, who was playing with singer and pianist Bobby Scott at a club around the corner. LaFaro expressed interest in forming a trio and suggested Paul Motian, who had appeared on Evans' album New Jazz Conceptions, as the drummer for the new group. The trio with LaFaro and Motian became one of the most celebrated piano trios in jazz. With this group, Evans' focus settled on traditional jazz standards and original compositions, with an added emphasis on interplay among band members. In December 1959, the band recorded its first album, Portrait in Jazz, for Riverside Records. In early 1960, the trio began a tour that brought them to Boston, San Francisco, and Chicago. After returning to New York in February, the band performed at Town Hall on a multi-artist bill, and then began a residency at Birdland. While the trio did not produce any studio records in 1960, 2 bootleg recordings from radio broadcasts from April and May were illegally released in the early 1970s, which infuriated Evans. Later, they would be posthumously issued as the 1960 Birdland Sessions. Evans' trio with Motian and LaFaro recorded Explorations in February 1961, the group's second and final studio album. According to Orrin Keepnews, the atmosphere during the recording sessions was tense, Evans and LaFaro having had an argument over musical matters. The album featured the Evans trio version of Nardis, the Miles Davis piece Evans had recorded with Cannonball Adderley for Adderley's Portrait of Cannonball album in 1958. Apart from Nardis and Elsa, the album consisted of jazz standards. In late June 1961, Riverside recorded Evans' trio live at the Village Vanguard, which resulted in the albums Sunday at the Village Vanguard and Waltz for Debbie. Evans later showed special satisfaction with these recordings, seeing them as the culmination of the musical interplay of his trio. The death of 25-year-old Scott LaFaro in a car accident 10 days after the Vanguard performances devastated Evans. He did not record or perform in public again for several months. When Evans reformed his trio in 1962, 2 albums, Moonbeams and How My Heart Sings, resulted. In 1963, at the beginning of his association with Verve Records, he recorded Conversations with Myself, an album which featured overdubbing, layering up to 3 individual tracks of piano for each song. The album won him his first Grammy Award. Evans's heroin addiction increased following LaFaro's death. His girlfriend Elaine Schultz was also an addict. Evans habitually had to borrow money from friends, and eventually, his electricity and telephone services were turned off. Evans said, "You don't understand. It's like death and transfiguration. Every day you wake up in pain like death, and then you go out and score, and you are transformed. Each day becomes all of life in microcosm." Evans never allowed heroin to interfere with his musical discipline, according to a 2010 BBC Record Review article, which contrasts Evans's addiction with that of Chet Baker. On one occasion, while injecting heroin, Evans hit a nerve and temporarily disabled it, performing a full week's engagement at the Village Vanguard virtually one-handed. In 1966, Bill Evans met Puerto Rico-born, Juilliard-graduated Eddie Gomez. In what turned out to be an 11-year stay, Gomez sparked new developments in Evans's trio conception. One of the most significant releases during this period is Bill Evans at the Montreux Jazz Festival, which won him his second Grammy. It has remained a critical favorite and is one of 2 albums Evans made with drummer Jack DeJohnette. Other highlights from this period include Solo in Memory of His Father from Bill Evans at Town Hall, which also introduced Turn Out the Stars, a second pairing with guitarist Jim Hall, Intermodulation, and the solo album Alone, featuring a 14-minute version of Never Let Me Go, that won him his 3rd Grammy Award. In 1968, drummer Marty Morell joined the trio and remained until 1975. This was Evans's most stable, longest-lasting group. Evans was entering a period of personal stability. Between 1969 and 1970, Evans recorded From Left to Right, featuring his first use of electric piano. Between May and June 1971, Evans recorded the Bill Evans Album, which won 2 Grammy Awards. This all-originals album also featured alternation between acoustic and electric piano. Morell was an energetic, straight-ahead drummer, and many critics feel that this was a period of little growth for Evans. After Morell left, Evans and Gomez recorded 2 duo albums, Intuition and Montreux 3. In the early 1970s, Evans was caught at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport with a suitcase containing heroin. Although the police put him in jail for the night, he was not charged. However, he had to begin methadone treatment. In 1975, Morell was replaced by drummer Elliot Zygmunt. Several collaborations followed, and it was not until 1977 that the trio was able to record an album together. Both I Will Say Goodbye and You Must Believe in Spring highlighted changes that would become significant in the last stage of Evans's life. A greater emphasis was placed on group improvisation and interaction, and new harmonic experiments were attempted. Gomez and Zygmunt left Evans in 1978. Evans then asked Philly Joe Jones, the drummer he considered his all-time favorite drummer, to fill in. Several bassists were tried, with Michael Moore staying the longest. Evans finally settled on Mark Johnson on bass and Joe LaBarbera on drums. This trio would be Evans's last. At the beginning of a several-week tour through the Pacific Northwest in the spring of 1979, Evans learned that his brother Harry, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, had died by suicide at age 52. This news shocked him deeply, and some of the concerts had to be canceled. His friends and relatives believed that this event hastened his own death the following year. Mark Johnson recalled, "Bill's willingness to play and work decreased noticeably after the death of Harry. Actually, it was just the music itself that held him upright. He fulfilled his obligations because he needed money, but he barely showed a willingness to live." In August 1979, Evans recorded his last studio album, We Will Meet Again, written for his brother. The album won a Grammy Award posthumously in 1981, along with I Will Say Goodbye. His brother Harry's suicide may have also influenced his emotional state after 1979. It has been documented that he voluntarily quit his treatment for chronic hepatitis. On September 15, 1980, Evans, who had been in bed for several days with stomach pains at his home in Fort Lee, was accompanied by Joe LaBarbera to the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, where he died that afternoon. The cause of death was a combination of peptic ulcer, cirrhosis, bronchial pneumonia, and untreated hepatitis. Evans's friend Gene Lees described Evans's struggle with drugs as the longest suicide in history. This is James from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment.